Students must reach out to your school for accommodations. And remember that post-secondary schools like colleges do not have an obligation to identify that you need accommodations. So you really have to initiate that process yourself, which we're going to get into now. And I will turn over to my colleague Alex for that.
Great. Thanks so much. It's nice to be here with everyone. My name is Alex Laguna. I'm the director of the post-secondary readiness project at Advocates for Children. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about college programs and search. How, as someone with a disability, how do you think about certain college programs? What goes into the search process? What are some considerations that should be taken? Next slide, please. So and this is going to be talking about programs as a whole. The next section of slides is going to be about the accommodation process and the specific supports. But this is just more globally how to think about it. And, one of the things that, what this slide shows, they're not official categories of colleges in terms of their disability supports or how they serve students with disabilities. It is the overarching law, the ADA, the Section 504, and these kind of other regulations that determine how colleges provide supports. But the story is much deeper than that. In terms of when you're looking for a college. So if you look at this slide, for example, it goes a little bit, as you're going to your right, in increasing order of how much support there is in a school. So I'd say the first category is general education with accommodations. So this is a general school, general college or university that serves everyone, the general population, and they legally require to give you accommodations, and all schools must comply with ADA accommodations. Now, I'm going to talk about the second category, which will help you to understand some of the nuances here. So, general education school with accommodations and supports. Now, there are a significant number, some schools across the country, colleges that decided to do more than the ADA required. They give you access to learning specialists, academic coaches. They have disability resource centers, things like that. So the schools themselves have said, hey, look, we want to be more inclusive. And this is what they're doing is actually not even per se legally required. Maybe it should be, but that's another story. But they want to they want to recruit, they want to serve, they want to provide more supports. They really understand what certain students with disabilities need, and they choose to do this. Now, some school, because it goes beyond the ADA, it's not always free. Some schools provide disability specific academic coaching, and there's a fee for it. That you have to pay for a semester. And some of these examples, there's many schools across the country, but Mitchell College, Adelphi University Bridges program, Hofstra University has a specialized academic coaching program for students with disabilities. And, this is something to think about. These are the considerations you have to make. What do I need? What does my student need? What does my child need? Things like, things like that. What level of support do I need? And there's a couple of slides on this, so I'm going to talk more. But the highest level around colleges that support disability is specifically tailored instruction, universal learning design. Now, there's a handful of schools, not as many. When you think about Landmark College, when you think some of the specific Think College type programs that are for students with IDD or students with autism, or specific programs related to neurodiverse students. There are other programs like this. I'm just naming a few, but Landmark College, which is, one example, is a school exclusively dedicated to students with learning disabilities and things like that. So you don't need accommodations. Their class is already small. You don't need certain things because they do it from the outset. So this is something to think about. What works for you? What kind of campus do I need? What are the needs? What are the goals? Okay. Um, um, uh, Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, as you're going through your college search process, this is just a slide or an example of these are the things you need to think about: location, size, what's the housing like, academics. These are things that any student with or without a disability is considering, right? But there is a way to put a disability gloss on it. And what I mean is, like, when you're thinking about the size of the school, some schools have 300 size classes, right? You're not going to get a smaller classroom. It's not a reasonable accommodation. But some schools naturally, just by the way they're designed, have 20 students in a class or 10 or whatever. Similarly, some schools cost plays a role. It's not always disability specific, but at the same time, these are things you think about, and even how location. And I'm going to just use it. Think about maybe you're a wheelchair user or you have some other kind of disability. Some campuses are incredibly spread out where you have to travel super far between classes. Some campuses are hilly. These are all things that you really need to consider. It really plays a role. Not all colleges are really created equal from that sense. Next slide, please. And this is just something else to think about, right? What's the admission process like? What's the inclusion? How much does the school, scream loud and proud? We're proud of our disability students. There are schools around students with disabilities. There are schools around the country that have specific housing for students with disabilities with, personal aid assistance and certain things, right? The school doesn't always have to do that, but they really want to support disability culture and students with disabilities. And this goes in every area: academics, housing, program administration. Some schools, are open-minded to talking with parents of students with disabilities, and they have a specific structure for that. So these are all things to think about. And I'll even add some more: your interest and your passion, understanding strengths and challenges, accommodation needs. Some schools, because certain accommodations are not legally defined, some schools offer a specific accommodation and some schools don't, right? Some schools want to go out of their way to do that and some don't. So I think at the beginning, I think this is my last slide. So I'm just gonna share a couple things. Look, I think it's very important as you're thinking about this stuff to do your research and information gathering. Ask for a meeting with the disability office. Do a campus visit. Reach out to other students that are there. Learn about the culture. Learn about the supports. Because in many ways, with the IDEA and high school and things like that, the supports are similar. There's one special education system all across New York City and how the IEP works. In college, it's very different. And I just want to encourage you all to really get out there and do some research and look into it to try to understand better. We can have a 3-hour webinar just on college searches alone, but I think that's all the time that I have for today, meaning for this section. Next slide.
Okay, thanks, Alex. I'm going to talk a little bit about what disability accommodations look like and how you get them when you're in a higher education institution. So, the first thing is, as Malia talked about earlier, there's a difference between what you get under the IDEA when you're in K through 12 and the reasonable accommodations that you're then entitled to under the different statutes Malia mentioned. And these reasonable accommodations are things that modify the higher education environment to give students with disabilities the same access as those without disabilities. And you are entitled to these accommodations, but as Malia mentioned, you have to be the one who asks for them. And so understanding what a reasonable accommodation is most important. So the first being that the reasonable accommodation that you ask for, it might be extra time on an exam. It has to be necessary for that student to have equal access to their education because of their disability related limitations. So this is important because it can't just be something that's helpful. It has to be something that you actually need to be able to have equal access. The accommodation also has to be effective. And this seems pretty self-explanatory, but schools don't have, you can ask for specific accommodations, but a school doesn't have to provide that exact accommodation, but they do have to provide accommodations that are effective for you as a student with a disability to access your education equally to students without disabilities. Additionally, you want to make sure you want to make sure that your school is looking at your request in an individual manner because schools can't just say, we offer these reasonable accommodations for students with ADHD. If you have a accommodation request that's outside of that and you have ADHD, we're not providing it. No, they have to look at you as an individual, your disability related needs in your program and make determinations about what accommodations are necessary and effective for you to equally access your education. So there are some limitations to reasonable accommodations. The first being that accommodations can't create an undue burden for your institution. And so that can often be either an administrative burden where they're saying this is too time consuming. We don't have enough people to do this. A lot of different like bureaucratic type things that they may push back against. Whereas uh, for that, one way that we found that you can kind of poke holes in that argument if a school comes back and says that to you is take a look and see if they have a similar accommodation or way that they're administering a program that's outside of maybe your college. It might be like a different college in the university. So you can go ahead and say specifically, this is you can provide this because look, you provide it here. The other type of an undue burden is a financial burden on the institution. So this happens when your accommodation might be really expensive. But what's important with this is courts don't consider just the financial burden of the program that the
Maddie, I'm sorry to interrupt you. For some reason, your volume dropped pretty significantly.
oh, can you hear me any better now?
Yeah, you got to get closer. Yeah, that's better.
Okay, maybe I just need to get closer. Okay, thanks. So the undue, let's do it. I'll start back. So an undue financial burden is going to be one where the institution is saying your accommodation is too expensive. And it might be too expensive, but you have to consider the institution's budget as a whole, not just the budget that they have for the program that you're in. So they can't say, well, we only budgeted $5,000 to run the program that you're in, and you're asking for $1,000 accommodation or something that costs that. Um, Therefore, we can't. No, you're going to take the whole budget of the institution as a whole into consideration when you're determining if something's financially burdensome. Additionally, an accommodation can't be a fundamental alteration to the institution's program. So, in the higher education context, this is usually considered something that substantially modifies the academic program. So, for instance, you usually can't change the content of a test, of like what the professor is actually testing you on. You might be able to change the format of the test. That's a more difficult accommodation, but they're for sure you can't really change the content, but other fundamental alterations you can kind of push back on a little bit. That's a little bit of a like a term of art. So you have to make an argument about why it doesn't modify, why your accommodation wouldn't modify substantially the institution's program. So those are kind of the boundaries that we use reasonable accommodation in. And so to take a look at some of the common academic accommodations that students can receive, um, we're going to send out all of these slides to you all. So I'm not going to read through all of them right now, but these are just like, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's a good list to start thinking and for you to brainstorm. So it might be extra time on exams, testing in an alternate distraction environment, um, it might be being able to take a break or having meetings with your accessibility counselor or getting an advanced copy of the PowerPoint slides that your professor is going to use throughout a class so that you can read them beforehand. There's also something that we noted down at the bottom here, and this is hyperlinked, so you'll be able to go to it. It's called the Job Accommodations Network. This is a federal organization that helps employees brainstorm what accommodations would be helpful for them in the workplace. And yes, it is tailored to the workplace, but what we've found is that a lot of those accommodations that they list out really well can be applicable to the higher education environment. So they have kind of like an A to Z disability list, and you can click on specific disabilities that might be relevant to you. And it has a list of some common accommodations that people request with that disability. And it can just be a good jumping off point. You can also reach out to individuals at the Job Accommodations Network, and they can work with you and have a conversation to brainstorm what accommodations you might need to succeed. The other types of accommodations that you can get as a student in higher education, extracurricular accommodations. So things like a club or a sporting event. You might be able to get a remote attendance at some of your club meetings or closed captioning at those meetings. If you're going to a sporting event or a musical, you might be able to get alternative seating if you have a mobility impairment. For housing accommodations, that can, if you have a dorm room, that could be an accessible bathroom or desk in your dorm room. If you're in a classroom, it might be an accessible desk in your classroom. You also might need an elevator building because obviously not all dorms have elevators. Then you've got some admissions accommodations. So just because you haven't been admitted to the school yet, you're still entitled to a reasonable accommodation within the admissions process. So you could ask for an accessible application format. So that might be in Braille or large print, or it might be a screen reader. You could ask for virtual interviews if you can't travel for an interview, or an alternative interview timing. Maybe that's longer or shorter depending on your disability needs. This isn't exhaustive, but these are just types of accommodations that students can receive, and it's a good jumping off point for you to think about what might be helpful for you as a student with a disability. So lastly, what I'm going to talk about is assistive technology. And so this has become really popular in the types of accommodations students receive over the past few years. So there's different types of software and like technological devices that students can use that will help them in their higher education academics. So that might be something like a software that reads the text on a screen out loud to you, or vice versa, where you speak and it dictates into a screen, so that it's like speech to text. It might be a pen that allows you to record your classes, or it might be the pen can sometimes transmit to a hearing aid, and that can amplify the volume in the classroom of a student or other students answering questions or the professor. So these can be really helpful things that students can rely on, and it's always good to start considering what options might be out there, and that can be done through a lot of different avenues as you continue to learn what new technology continues to come out every day.
Okay, so you just heard what a reasonable accommodation is and the different types of accommodations you can request. I am going to discuss how to obtain a reasonable accommodation. And so first, what you want to do is locate the accommodations process at your school. And so every college or post-secondary institution has an office that's responsible for disability services. It might be called different things, right? And so it might be called an accessibility office. It might be called disability services or something similar. The first step is to find the school's website and try to locate where that office is, right? And so secondly, you have to gather documentation of your disability. And so to get accommodations, you'll likely need to provide documentation of your disability. This could be an IEP or 504 plan from high school. It could be a letter from a doctor. It could be a psychological evaluation. If you're not sure what you need, check your school's requirements or ask the disability office directly, and they're supposed to guide you. Next, start brainstorming the accommodations you need, right? Think about your classes and what barriers you might face. Do you need extra time on tests? Do you need note-taking assistance? When I was in law school, I needed extra time on tests. Why? Because I had back issues. And so sometimes I would need to get up and be able to allow myself time to stretch. And so one of the accommodations I had was, getting extra time on tests. And so you'll see on the slides that we're going to share with you, and, some of the list of common academic accommodations that Madison read to you previously, you can use that to start brainstorming the type of accommodations that you may need. Next, follow your school's process. Submit your application for accommodations through the proper channels, right? Whatever it is that the school, is saying to do, make sure that you follow through with that process. And also keep a copy of everything you submit, right? Now, if you do everything that the school says and your request for an accommodation is denied, then you should appeal, right? So if your request is denied or it's only partly approved, you do have the right to appeal. And you should ask the school or institution what is the appeal process, and also ask for the appeal process to be in writing. So once you appeal, you should meet with the decision maker. You'll likely have a meeting with someone from the Disability Services office. This is your chance to talk about your needs and to make your case, right? You should be honest and you should be clear about what helps you learn and participate. You should then file a complaint. If your appeal, is still denied, I think the next step would be to file a complaint. So if you believe your rights are being violated, for example, if you're denied access or you're treated unfairly, you can file a complaint with the school's Title IX or civil rights officer, or, you can make a complaint with another campus administrator who's responsible for discrimination or disability issues. Now, if you do all of that and you still don't, see any progress, or you still don't have any resolution to your issue, then you can file a complaint with city or state agencies. And, you can file with the New York Division of Human Rights or the New York City Commission on Human Rights. And these agencies are responsible for enforcing disability rights under the state and local laws. And lastly, if you need any help, you can reach out to an attorney or advocate. NYLPI and AFC, we'll be here to help you if you call us and you have an issue. We'll do our best to provide, whatever assistance we can. Maddie, you can go to the next slide, please. And so just more on how to obtain a reasonable accommodation. It's important that, you really practice self-advocacy, right? You are going to be solely responsible for contacting the disability service offices and requesting an accommodation. And so, I'm sorry, one second. Right here on this slide, we have an outline of, the application procedure if you are attending a CUNY school. Now, this process and procedure is particular to CUNY schools, but it's just an example to show you the channels that you might have to go through in order to obtain a reasonable accommodation. And so at CUNY, the first step is to schedule an appointment with the office. You can either do that by phone, email, or in some instances, you can use a campus-based scheduling system to schedule an appointment with the disability service office, right? That will be the first step at CUNY in order to obtain a reasonable accommodation. Secondly, you have to submit current comprehensive documentation of your disability for which you are requesting an academic accommodation. If you do not have documentation, schedule a meeting with the director to discuss documentation requirements and potential accommodations. And they should be able to provide you, further information on what is going to be helpful and what exactly you need. The last step in order to obtain a reasonable accommodation at CUNY is once your documentation has been received and deemed appropriate, the disability services staff will schedule a meeting with you to develop an accommodation plan. You will then be given a letter or an ID card, or an email will be sent to each class, which is going to outline your accommodations for that semester. You can go to the next slide. And so now I want to talk about documentation, right? This is one of the most important parts of requesting an accommodations in higher education. And so what counts as documentation and why is it needed? So your school will usually ask for documentation to confirm two things, right? They want to know, one, that you have a disability, and two, what specific accommodations are needed to support you in your academic program. But the good news about this is that you don't have to give more than what's necessary. So you do need to provide documentation that explains how your disability affects your life activities, such as like learning, focusing, reading, walking, and communicating, right? You also are going to need to, provide documentation that connects your disability to the accommodations you're requesting. So for example, if you're asking for extended time on tests, the documentation should explain why that's needed, right? You do not have to give your entire medical history. You do not need to list your medications that you're taking unless you're requesting accommodations for the side effect of those medications. So for instance, if you're requesting, extra time because you have concentration issues due to a side effect of your medication, in that one particular instance, you would probably need to list the medication that it is, causing that side effect in which you need the reasonable accommodation for, right? I just want to provide a few more key points. The documentation requirements, they must be reasonable. And so a school cannot ask for excessive or invasive medical proof that goes beyond what's necessary. The more complex of an accommodation that you are asking for, you may be required to give more detailed documentation. So for example, if you're requesting a classroom aid or some type of highly specialized technology, the school may ask for additional documentation or justification, right? And getting this documentation, it can be expensive because sometimes it may require you to get, like a medical evaluation. There are nonprofits that will, try to assist you with, getting free or low cost evaluations. And so if you need help connecting to those type of resources, you can always reach out to us, and you'll definitely have our contact information at the end of this presentation. It's also important for New York City students to really know what local law 18 is. And so if you're a student with a disability who graduated from a New York City public high school and you had an IEP or a 504 plan, local law 18 is going to help you, right? This law allows your special education records like your IEP and your 504 plan to be electronically shared with CUNY colleges. That way you don't have to track down like the paperwork. You don't have to worry about proving everything all over again. So if you're going to a CUNY school, ask the Disability Service Office if they've already received your records under local law 18, and that could really save you a lot of time. Next slide, please. And so lastly, I want to talk about confidentiality. All colleges or universities or any higher education program, they will treat data on students with disabilities with confidentiality in accordance with the applicable laws and regulations. And so this means that your disability status and any documentation you provide is private. So schools are legally required to protect your information, and that's protected under federal laws like the ADA and Section 504, which was covered earlier, and also FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And this law basically gatekeeps the right to access your education records. And so under this law, you can ask to see your records. Any records that the school keeps on you, you can ask to see, including your transcripts, accommodation letters, communications between departments about your academic progress, right? You can also control who sees your information. And so, the school cannot share your records with other people. They can't share it with your parents, professors, any outside organizations without your written consent, right? And so these laws make sure that your information is shared with people who need to know, like the disability service offices, or even like a professor who needs to implement your accommodations, but it cannot be shared freely with others. It will not appear on your transcript, your degree, or like your general record. In fact, like your disability information and documentation is housed separately from your student academic information. And this is important, right? Your disability records are not stored in the same file as your academic records. And so this means that like your professors will not see your diagnosis or your documentation. Academic advisors, financial aid, admissions staff, they do not have automatic access to your disability records. And so you can feel confident that when you register for accommodations, that it is a confidential process. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Malia and Alex.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to take a little pause and answer some of the questions we have. We've piled up a couple of questions, and I want to make sure we get to them because there's some really important ones, if that's okay. So I'm just going to start going from the top and do the best that we can. I mean, some of these questions need an hour-long discussion. I mean, every college accommodations and how accessibility works in schools is very nuanced, but I'm going to do my best, okay? So first we have about internship sites, and do internship sites need to kind of do accommodations carryover? So the answer generally is no, but it's a little bit gray. When you're in an internship in a high school setting in school, anywhere that the school places you, like you guys may have heard of SYEP programs or TOP or some of these other that New York City has, the school is placing you there. It's directly through the school. That has to your IEP needs for the most part legally are required to be met. College is different. You might be working in a college and you decide to get an internship at a hospital or somewhere else, and it could be related to your school or it could be related to your major or your work, but that employer or that work site is not they have to abide by the ADA, but they don't have to abide by the specific ADA by the specific accommodations that are in college or being dealt with at your school, sorry, at your university. So it's a little bit tricky. I mean, I would say, look, if a university is placing you there, let's say it's an arts program, and the arts program has a direct relationship with, I don't know, Pixar, some kind of employer, and they have a true partnership, then the college must be the college must kind of adhere to accommodations. So it's a little bit of a gray area, and employers have their own ADA rules for internships or accommodations, but it's not always the college accommodations. The other part of the question was, can you get accommodations if you choose not to disclose? Generally, most colleges, unless it's a specific college that is for learning disabilities, you're in a program, will not grant accommodations if you don't disclose. I will say, I mean, this is my personal opinion. Disclosing is confidential, right? Nobody will know. Your professors will know you get accommodations, but they won't know why. Your college transcript won't say anything that says you have autism or some other condition. So and it'll never be on your transcript. Employers will never know. No one will ever know. So there's not a lot of, for me personally, not a lot of reasons to not disclose. But if you don't disclose at the college level, you generally will not be granted accommodations. Next question has to do with not all accommodations are equal. They fall short of assisting students. And there's a couple questions related to this. Generally students who may be neurodiverse or students with autism or a variety of kind of conditions, do have issues with executive functioning or things like that. There's a couple questions on this topic. So generally, it is not an accommodation. It is not a legally required accommodation for a school to help you with time management or some of the other executive functioning elements that you may need help with. Look, some schools do have learning specialists. They're choosing to give you or provide learning specialists because they want to do so and they want to support their students, but it is not clearly legally required. And specifically, like the Adelphi Bridges program, just using it as an example, there's others, has an academic coaching program for students with autism and students with disabilities. That means you get to meet. You have to pay, I think it's $3,000 a semester for that, but you meet every week, sometimes more than once a week, with an academic coach that helps you with your time management, helps you with your assignments, helps you with executive function, helps you with all those things. It is not an ADA required accommodation. Look, I think the law should be absolutely different. I think there should be much more supports, but I'm giving from, I've worked in universities. I've probably handled dozens and dozens of students with accommodations and universities, and it's generally not offered as an accommodation. I'm just going to read something that defines an accommodation. It's going to sound very legalese, and I'm sorry, but maybe it'll be a little helpful. An appropriate accommodation is a modification or adjustment to a course, program, service, activity, or facility that enables qualified students with disabilities to have equal opportunity to attain the same level of performance or to have equal benefits and privileges as are available to similarly situated students without disability. Now, it's very legalese. It's a definition of what an appropriate accommodation is. It's kind of hard to fully grasp because it's so different, but I'm going to use an example from the questions. One of the questions was, can you, if you have, executive functioning challenges or others, can you get flexibility around handing in assignments late or not on time or things like that? So it's a great example. It's a great example. Great question. So if you have a condition like autism or anxiety, and you take tests, right? So your condition clearly shows, documented by a doctor, that during a test you struggle more, maybe your mind races, maybe this happens or other happens, you will be granted an accommodation of additional time, twice double time on an exam, time and a half on an exam. And that is something that all schools do, extended time on exams. Extended times on assignments is much more trickier. The reason is you knew about the assignment for weeks. Sometimes it was months that it was assigned. What is your specific disability related functional limitation that, you had 3 or 4 months to do it. You didn't do it. Colleges may push back. Now, colleges will say, if you have a condition, even if it's autism or you have a mental health condition, look, I had a panic attack the day before the assignment was due. Some schools will say, not a problem. Some schools will say, get me a doctor's letter and we'll give it to, document whatever. You ended up in the hospital or you had an exacerbation of your disability. That's what it states. Then they'll give you 2 or 3 more weeks or whatever, 5 days to finish the assignment. So it's case by case. But a blanket accommodation to just submit your assignments whenever you want, or to submit all of them late, is generally something that schools don't do. You know what I mean? It's just some schools, again, if you're at a disability, a place like Landmark College oftentimes doesn't have deadlines and you can submit it at any point. Every school is a little different. But what the ADA does not require is a fundamental alteration to programs or assignments. What does that mean? If for every program a student is writing a 10-page paper, then it's a 10-page paper for everyone. It is not legally required that just because you have a disability, no matter what that disability is, generally, that you get to submit a 2-page paper, or you don't have to submit an essay. So the programmatic requirements generally stay the same. Now, there's very specific circumstances, or it's at the discretion of the professor where they may give you a different assignment. And this is the gray area why all colleges aren't created equal. Some colleges are very open to this kind of thing, and you've heard about elitist colleges, right? I mean, throw out there Columbia and all these schools that haven't been having a great reputation recently. They're very strict on these kind of things, and they will fight with you. They'll give you a denial. They'll make you take on a lawyer. They'll make you file a formal complaint because they hold the hard line. Now, I don't think they should, in my personal opinion. I think there should be a lot more flexibility. I think there should be more support. But I'm just sharing from experience. Let me see if I've missed any. I mean, I answered these questions at very high levels. A lot of these questions we could talk about for an hour or two. Sorry, my fellow panelists, have I missed any questions while we're here?
I don't think so, Alex. I think you went through most of them. We can always, if somebody feels like theirs wasn't appropriately answered, go ahead and put a clarification in, and when we get to the end, we'll take another swing through all of them.
Sure. So I'm going to get through um, look, I don't want to discourage anyone by my answers. I understand. Look, there's always a way and a path forward. I think it starts with picking the right school. Some schools really have incredibly great supports, even if students have executive functioning type challenges. Look, the nature of college around like you're on a campus. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to be ready to get up for class. You have to talk to your professors. It is a very different environment and can be quite a challenge. But look, we're here. We're all advocates. We're here to try to support and provide support if you need it. So I'm going to go through this last few slides very quickly. There's not a ton here. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yep. So this is just some of the things that exist outside of the actual college or university that could help you in terms of going to school or college. So Access VR, you've probably all heard of this. If you haven't, I'm happy to meet with you and talk more about it. But Access VR helps both young adults and adults with disabilities seek employment. A lot of times what you need for employment is a college degree or greater, more training or education. Next slide, please. Access VR can be really useful because even if your college, the university, doesn't provide a specific accommodation or service, in some instances, I mean, this could be its own 2-hour webinar, Access VR can provide it. So whether it's certain support, certain accommodations, they also provide financial assistance, right? They can help you pay your tuition. They can help students with disabilities with assistive technology needs and all kinds of other things. So Access VR is a great resource. It's not the easiest agency to use, and you have to really advocate for yourself, but it's a great way to supplement. There's a lot of questions around things that may not be ADA required accommodations. The school can provide it, or you can try to work with an outside agency like Access VR to secure it. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit about physical accessibility, also kind of thrown in here in terms of other things to consider. But, there's various laws around public institutions and private institutions and the physical accessibility that they have to provide and the ADA standards requiring elevators. Look, just for the sake of time, I'm going to jump through this, but I will say on physical accessibility grounds, schools either have to be accessible, or if it's an issue for you, they have to move the classroom. That is generally considered a reasonable accommodations. So there's different ways to deal with the physical accessibility challenges. But again, we're just working with the time that we have. So we're happy to meet with anyone individually. Next slide, please. So I just want to talk about, this is our last slide, kind of some tips and things to think about as you're going the college journey. Identify support. You could do this even in some cases before you start. One of the things that I do with the students that I counsel through college searches is when you talk about the career office, you can talk to the career office and be like, do you work with students with disabilities? Do you understand disability specific career search type things? And some career offices are completely separate from disability office. And I know some colleges where the disability office and the career office work together, and there's a lot of knowledge. So you have to identify what things exist in schools, what's accessible, what's not accessible, where is there disability competency, where isn't. Every school is not created, every college is not created equal, and certainly not the programming supports. Again, fee-based supports, we've spoken about this, academic coaching. Tutoring is oftentimes granted as an ADA accommodation. Every school's a little different, but academic coaching is generally a little different. That's a person you're meeting with regularly who's helping you stay on time and time management, things like that. I've already discussed it. So, staying organized, planning a study schedule, things like that, engaging with your professors. It's one of the most things that I work with a lot of students in college setting. The first thing I try to get them into the habit is you have to talk to your professor. It's very different than high school where your teachers and instructors are kind of your sometimes special educators are talking to you or doing things for you. College, hey, professor, I'm not sure about this. I need to engage. I need to do that. Utilize the writing center. Schools have writing centers. Utilize tutoring. Find all these different ways. Go to professor office hours, getting into the habit of going to office hours in college. These are all things that are kind of important, and you should think about. Setting your academic and non-academic goals and understanding what those are and where your strengths are. On one hand, I do believe that a student with disability can do anything their heart desires that they put their mind to. But, for example, for me, you don't see me in this image, but I'm a quadriplegic and I use a power wheelchair. So, I went to law school and that was a decision that I made, but actually I sustained my disability at the age of 19 while I was in an engineering program. I made a personal decision that being an engineer as a quadriplegic is difficult and probably not the best career for me. So understanding your interests, your passions, your strengths, all these kind of things play a very important role in the college setting. The core curriculum in high school and through like your secondary education is generally the same. It's a little bit different here and there. But college is a whole different world, and you really get to make a lot of choices and kind of determine your own path. Look, we're going to resources. I think that's it. I will say, look, there are difficulties in college. Maybe you have the greatest disability service office ever, but you have a professor. There are difficult professors that, some accommodations they don't support as much, some they do. It's a difficult space to navigate. You got to self-navigate, you got to self-advocate. Your family and your fellow advocates got to advocate for you. And please reach out to us as advocates, and we're happy to help you in any way that we can to deal with those difficulties. But I'll turn it over. I think Maliha is going to take over from here, but we're here to help you, and we're rooting for you all if college is in your future and of interest.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, so this is Madison again. I just wanted to go over some resources that NYLPI has that can be helpful. These are all hyperlinked, so when you get the PowerPoint, you'll be able to click and use get to each of these. So the first is a higher education fact sheet. It's specific to students with disabilities in higher ed in New York. At the bottom of that is an accommodation request template letter. And so if your school doesn't have a portal or a specific form that you need to fill out to be able to request an accommodation, this can be really helpful for you to kind of like input your information into this template letter and submit it as your request. Additionally, we have some guidance for clinicians who are completing the type of documentation supporting your request for an accommodation. Sometimes doctors are really thinking like doctors, and they don't know all of the requirements that we have in the law to be able to obtain an accommodation. So you can give this document to your professor and it can help them walk through it. Then also we have a link here for just direct assistance from NYLPI. If you ever need additional help, you can contact us. And through this link, you'll be able to get to Sakina or I. And then I'm going to turn it over here, some AFC resources that I think Malia is going to go through.
Yeah, thanks, Maddie. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, we have a general helpline number that it's over there in the slide. And like we said, we're going to send these slides around that you can call with questions specifically related to transition services and college planning. Probably the most efficient way to reach us is to email my colleague Alex. His email is on the screen right there. And in these links that you're going to receive in these slides, there also will take you to more resources on our website and specifically to our guide on transition services and college planning.
And if you could please, Maddie or someone, you could share my email directly in the chat if you like.
Okay, yeah, I can do that now.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Um,
Sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
no worries. And so we would love, as we're answering some final questions, if you could take our survey, really helps us, improve our webinars. You can scan this QR code for the survey. And then, Maddie, I'm going to send the link to the survey in the chat if you could send it to everyone as well.
Yes, I will. I'll send it along with the PowerPoint slides as well. Now we have 2 minutes. I know we are definitely not going to get through everyone's questions. I think Alex did a really good idea or overview of some of the executive functioning and other types of questions related to issues with accessibility. I am just kind of scrolling through. We are going to share the slideshow as well as everybody's contact information for the panelists. So you'll have access to us for any of these questions we don't get to. For specific disabilities and the types of accommodations that might be helpful for that, I do recommend taking a look at some of the slides that we have that described a lot of the different accommodations, along with looking at the job accommodations network, because that can help you be a really good place to start brainstorming. And then also recommend reaching out if you have other friends in the disability community that share that disability. You can also ask what accommodations that they used, but we're also here to assist as well. Does anyone see another one they can answer really quick? Otherwise, we'll share our contact information.
Yeah, I'll go through some. I've got a couple on here that I
Okay.
see could be whatever. So I'm going to start with one that asks accommodations for epilepsy. I'm going to use this to provide a global answer. So when you talk about a specific condition, college accommodations are individualized. What does that mean? So you could be one person with epilepsy, and you could be another person with epilepsy, excuse me. And you can be granted totally different accommodations. Same for autism. I'm a quadriplegic, could be two different quadriplegics getting different accommodations. Why? Your documentation identifies functional limitations. So for someone, those functional limitations have to do with X and with someone Y. And similarly, someone with one condition, how does their provider, their medical provider, the health provider, or the neuropsych eval or any evaluation explain what their limitations are? The college reviews those limitations as provided by the medical provider and determines what's an appropriate way to provide an accommodation to deal with that limitation. So there's various things. I don't know what the specific I know epilepsy general. I've worked in the space for a while, but if you told me how that epilepsy affects you, affects your access to education, then I would respond and say, these are the accommodations that would possibly work. Now, when you're talking to a college, you can go in there and say, what accommodations can you offer? And the college will offer you three things, right? I'm just using this example. If I come in there with you as Alex or Maliha or Maddie, anyone, we're going to come in with a list ready. So they're going to offer three. We're going to ask for 10. We're going to be like, well, what about this? What about this? What about that? Not in every case, but I'm saying sometimes colleges do play the like, hey, you're coming to us, we'll give you a very generic list, and that's what you get. That's why you need to self-advocate for yourself. You need to educate yourself, and you need to push, because that's the parents and students that are successful are the ones that are pushing for the more supports that they need. Now, I'm not saying that every support is going to be granted, but I'm saying that's what you need to do. I see another question here about a break. Breaks, you can take a break anytime you want. You can go on a leave of absence from your program. But in terms of how you would have to identify how your disability impacts, if you're looking for a specific leave of absence without it being held against you, you generally, for example, cancer is a short-term disability. Students will often apply, I need a year off to deal with the cancer treatment. The school will almost always grant it because you need to deal with that. Then you can come back in a year and not be a problem. Some other accommodations, hey, I need a year. You'd have to explain what your disability exacerbation is. Just because you have autism or you have some condition, and you go, look, I got a disability, give me a break. I need a break. I want to take some time off. That is not going to be enough to justify a leave of absence where you can stay in housing, where you can still come back and get financial aid, where you can still come back and get a slot in your program. So the leave of absence and the break question is very individualized, and some schools can be really tough about it because if they're holding a spot for you, that's a whole year that they're not getting paid by some other student. So again, I don't mean to be like a Debbie Downer. There's ways we can work through this stuff, but I'm just telling you the college approach on some of these. Let me see. I'm going to do one more question. I know we're at time. I'll do two questions. California Access VR. So look, Access VR falls into the general category of vocational rehabilitation agencies. Every state around the country has their version. It's not called Access VR, but if you Google vocational rehabilitation agency, all these agencies do is help young adults and adults find employment even when they have disabilities. Whether you're born with a disability or whether you get a disability later in life. So I'm sure California, knowing what California is, has a robust vocational rehabilitation program, and you can find it and probably talk to them, and they all function under very similar federal guidelines. Tutoring, I'll say this about tutoring. Tutoring comes in very different forms. Some places, all schools have, a lot of schools have tutoring centers where you can go and get tutoring. Where you can go and get by the way, while you guys are listening to me, please fill out the survey. I'm make believe I'm in the background talking to you. Please complete the survey. It's important for us. Tutoring, when you ask for a specific tutoring accommodation, you can be granted one. That could mean one-on-one tutoring as opposed to group tutoring. That could mean additional access to the tutoring center. It could mean tutoring on other topics, because sometimes they'll give you an hour or two, but you say, no, I need more tutoring. So all schools generally offer some version of tutoring, but you want a higher enhanced level of tutoring. Some schools have rules around what that looks like and when you can do it and when you can do it. Sometimes the school, you sign up for tutoring and the next tutor is available in 3 weeks. So some schools will have priority like lines where somebody with a disability as an accommodation can get faster access to tutoring. So that's just a little bit. Again, we could talk about tutoring for an hour. I mean, I fought over it with universities. So that's all I got, unless anyone else has any other questions, but I tried to get through most of them. I want to close on a positive note. You can go to college, you can get the supports that you need, we can figure it out, we can make it work. I know some of these colleges, and you probably hear the reputations for providing disability support aren't great, and it's true. Some of them are not great. I think that, look, there is an ocean between the strength of the IDEA and the ADA that guides college and higher education, and it's a little bit unfortunate that our laws aren't stronger and colleges aren't required to do more. But nonetheless, there's a lot that you can get, and there's a lot of supports, and I really believe if you're interested in college, you can make it happen. So that's all I got.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks, Alex, for ending us on a positive note, despite some of the warnings that we gave you all. I think also, if we didn't get to your question, I know that we're at time, so if you have additional questions, the email tonight with these slides will come from me, and we'll also share our other panelists' information to be able to, that you can reach out should you have an additional question or more specific issue that we might be able to help with. So thank you all so much for your time, and we will hopefully talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.